you're here tonight to hear about something a lot warmer. Tom and Kristin are here to talk about Hawaii and the Kalalau Trail. Hawaii is known as the Garden Island, and we all think about it as being this beautiful place, and it is, but it can also be harsh. And the best known example of that is the trail that they're going to be talking about, which runs about 11 miles along the Na Pali Coast. They went there in 2021 to try it out, even with COVID and landslides and all of the hassle that they had to do to get in there. And it's often mentioned among the most dangerous hikes in the world. So this should be pretty exciting and cool. Tom and Kristin have been surviving the pandemic by looking for the answer to what's the next adventure, and they've been bicycling, hiking, and paddling their way across Hawaii, Yellowstone, and 4 national parks in a week. So they've been out adventuring during this whole pandemic. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom and Kristin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kristin. This is Tom.
And we're here to talk about backpacking on the Kalalau Trail, which, good pronunciation. Fran, you nailed it. So
let me give you an introduction to why we did this trip. I turned 40 in June, and I wanted to take a big trip to keep my mind off turning 40. So I've always wanted to go to New Zealand, and that was kind of my plan when I turned 40. But first of all, it's winter in June. And second of all, the pandemic happened. And so I had to revamp my plans. And I've always wanted to go to Kauai. I've been to the other islands, but I knew of this trail along the Na Pali Coast. And that's all I pretty much knew about it. And I knew that the Na Pali Coast was gorgeous. So I said, let's go. And Tom said, sure. So didn't know anything about the trail. But let me give you a little introduction to where Kauai is in the Hawaiian Islands. Kauai is the oldest island and the most northwest, right?
it's the most northwest major island in the chain.
Yeah, in the chain.
So, and on the island of Kauai, the Na Pali Coast is on the northwest corner of the island, which is exactly opposite of the airport, which is important when you're trying to get to the trailhead. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. So if you're not familiar with what the Na Pali Coast is, this is what the Na Pali Coast is. So it's a pretty recognizable landmark.
That was taken on our trip from a boat, as you can see, and it's a little drier in June. That's their dry season. So you often see pictures of it actually much more lush green than that. I think the history of the Kalalau Trail is really interesting. The Kalalau Trail is an ancient Hawaiian footpath. The main access to the Na Pali region today, as it has been for centuries. It is estimated that as many as 5,000 Hawaiians lived in Kalalau Valley when Captain Cook arrived on Kauai in 1778. Today, the trail and the valleys it traverses are part of a state park.
So Kalalau is frequently included on lists of the most dangerous hikes in the world, and whether it is or not is open to interpretation. But the trail itself, it runs from Haena State Park to Kalalau Beach, right along the Na Pali Coast, and it hugs the coastline.
It kind of goes in and out of the coastline the whole way.
Right, but you're never too far from the ocean. It's 11 miles each way. It's an out and back trail. It's about 2,500 feet of vertical climbing each direction, with a 800-foot max elevation. There's a number of river crossings, and then there's a number of campgrounds. There's one at the midpoint, and then there's camping at the beach itself, which is really the goal. So like I mentioned, the trail begins at Haena State Park and ends at Kalalau Beach. Permits permits are required to hike the trail. We'll definitely be talking more about that in a little bit. And another thing that's good to know is that there's no roads, there's no motorized access at all to the beach. There's no cell signal. So really you're really kind of on your own on this. We got ahead of ourselves here.
Yeah.
But these are just some
good photos
that we're flipping through. So maybe we planned it backwards. Your mileage may vary, and we'll explain why here in a moment. But a lot of that has to deal with just the permitting process and getting permits, because it really is a hyper competitive process. And as of COVID, you're only allowed to get permits 30 days in advance. So why I say maybe we did this backwards is that most people get their permits and then plan the rest of their trip, whereas we planned an entire trip and then figured out and then realized how big a challenge it was going to be to actually get permits.
So we got lucky. So we were like, okay, these are the 4 days we wanted to go, and we got lucky, just lucky. But I think if I were to do it again, I think I would do exactly that. I would try to get permits first and build your trip around that, because it is extremely difficult.
Right, to the point that I think that they only issue 60 permits per day. And those permits, the permits that are available become available at midnight Hawaii time, which, depending on daylight savings time, is 5 a.m. Minnesota time. So 30 days before our trip, once we hit our window of dates that we wanted to be on the trail, we were up at 4:15 getting laptops and extra screens set up, and between the two of us, we had 3 laptops and a bunch of extra screens and as many browser windows open as we can. And it was just a rapid fire click, 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 because the website kind of just crashes as soon as the clock strikes midnight Hawaii time.
Why do they do not have a lottery? I have no idea. It makes it miserable for everybody. But we somehow got 3 days on trail, 2 nights in the exact time permit or period that we wanted. So
right. Another thing that's important to note is that the permits are per person, not per party. So, and at least when we did it, you couldn't try and get a permit with 2 people on it. So we both had to individually get permits for the same time period.
Yep.
So it's a challenge. We got permits for, like Kristin said, 2 nights. You can get up to 5 nights. To do it again, we're a little bit split, but we would definitely go longer. If it were me, I would go for 5 nights. I would go for the maximum, because seems like there's just so much to explore that we didn't even have a chance to look at while we were there.
Mm-hmm. This is just a photo of our campsite with me there.
So the other thing that's probably worth mentioning is that there's a Facebook group dedicated to the Kalalau Trail that's actually super helpful. There's a lot of people that can answer questions and give updates on trail conditions. There's also a lot of locals that frequent the board, which can also be useful once you start talking about how you're going to get to the trailhead. So the trailhead is in Hyena State Park, and there's kind of 3 basic ways of getting there. You can try and park, but it's a separate permit that you need to get, which is also limited and competitive. And we've heard reports that break-ins are common, so we decided we didn't even want to try for that. The shuttle seems like a great option that wasn't available to us when we went, due to a landslide up the road that kind of cut off that northern part of the island. So
and COVID probably too.
Right. So that left us with option 3, which is to get a ride from a local. And we were fortunate that our Airbnb host was an amazing person and picked us up at 5 o'clock in the morning to drop us off at the trailhead. But there's also people in the Facebook group that would be happy to give you a lift to the trailhead for the right price.
And on the way back, we hitched a ride with a local. It was busier midday. And so there's plenty of people kind of going. I mean, there's only one way out of there, so there's one road. So everyone's going the same direction. So it's pretty easy to hitch a ride. And that was a story in of itself. So we'll talk about that next time. But
right. So the hike itself starts at the parking lot at Hyena. And before you can actually get to the trailhead, you have about a 0.4 of a mile hike through the state park. And this is actually a subsistence farming project that's going on right in the middle of the park. So this is actually an active taro field that people were working. So once you get to the trailhead, you've got your typical sign, and it's gorgeous. And this is at about 6:15 in the morning. So we made sure to get an early start, which is recommended. It's an 11-mile trail, but it still took us about 9 hours to do that 11 miles. So it's a lot due it mostly to the elevation change. You're kind of just always going either up or down.
Tom would have done it a lot faster than me had he been on his own, but I was going extra slow. So we'll talk about why in a minute. But 9 hours with not much rest, actually.
Right. So the first 2 miles of the trail you don't need a permit to hike. So anybody who can get access to the state park can hike the first 2 miles in, and that's a big question mark again with COVID. I'm not sure of the current situation, but when we went, you needed a access permit just even to get into the state park, much less park or do the trail. So at the 2 mile mark, you come to the first river crossing, and that's when we realized that it wasn't necessarily going to be just this pedestrian, river crossing and ankle deep. It's boulder hopping, and it's above the knee with pretty rapid water. So
yeah, and I was really glad I had Tom with me. I would obviously not recommend doing this trail alone if you could help it. Just because, you're boulder hopping sometimes on like wet rock to wet rock, and it's deeper than it looks. And that's low water range. And one of the reasons why this trail is so dangerous is because of the river crossings. Actually, there's 3 of them. And as you can imagine, with higher water, it can get really dangerous really fast. I could see that very quickly. And it's a lot deeper than I thought. I was really glad I had poles to kind of steady myself as I was walking. And then we changed into sandals as we walked across those like chacos.
So as you can see, a lot of the trail really hugs the cliffs right along the coast. And in some places like this, it's, you're not right on the cliff edge, but it's never too far away. It's also worth noting that, the trail here, the environment is very lush and green. And that's one of the things I thought was really cool about the trail is as you walk the trail, you cross through a number of different ecosystems, and the trail actually ends up much drier at the end than at the beginning. So at about the midway mark, you have another river crossing, and this is where we ended up stopping for lunch. This is also where the midway campground is, which we didn't actually see. We hiked straight through. Our understanding from hearing people on Facebook is that the campground is up a valley and it's mosquito infested. So you kind of set up your tent, crawl inside your tent, and stay there until it's time to take down your tent.
However, if I had more nights on trail, it might be a nice option just to save your body, and it might be worth it for one night. Like if I had a whole week to just kind of take my time, I might. Tom wasn't too convinced about that, but I might, just to kind of not feel as pressured and enjoy it a little bit more.
So Once we continue past this point, things start to get drier. Here you can see it's starting to get rockier. You're not having as much vegetation, and pretty rapidly after that, you come to what's kind of the most infamous part of the Kalalau Trail, which is Crawler's Ledge. And this is really a section of trail that's extremely exposed. It's a narrow footpath, it's steep. So this is the beginning of it. And you have a pretty steep descent down to it.
Right. I didn't realize that the anxiety on my face in that last picture was that obvious, but it the thing about Kauai that you have to know in hiking, and what I learned about that makes this trail probably the most technically difficult I've ever done, is that the whole island's just crumbling under your feet. And so you're going to get most likely two different types of landscape. One, muddy and slippery, which has its own dangers, just totally muddy everywhere on trails everywhere if it had rained, or you're going to get this dry, crumbly stuff that is just eroding under your fingertips. And so when you're hiking along, here's this cliff and there's all this loose rock and sand and whatnot. And that's why it took 9 hours. Admittedly, I don't know if my shoes were the best choice. But on a decline or incline, really, when it's that loose, man, you're going slower than you think. So that's the deal there. So
right. So this is really kind of the first view that you get of Crawler's Ledge. And it's not a very long trail segment, actually. I think it's only like a couple of tenths of a mile. But you're very aware of every step of it. So we've got some more steep, rocky descent, and you can really kind of see how dry all the vegetation is. This is also June. I think we forgot to mention that we went in the middle of June, which is the dry season there.
And we had perfect weather, by the way. It couldn't have been better.
So this is probably the most cringeworthy part of Crawler's Ledge. The nice part about it is, if you look at the trail, there's no loose anything. It's just bare rock. So it looks worse than it really is.
Yeah, I was actually thrilled. Balance wise, I was like, I can handle this. This is solid ground. I get to hold on to something. This is great, right? The problem is, in this section for me, was the wind by the time we got there. And it's notoriously windy in this section. Obviously, it's very exposed. The wind was whipping so bad that I had to stop, catch my breath, wait till the wind died down before I felt like I could take a next step, because I had to be very careful with my steps, first of all. Second of all, the wind was whipping and you have this big pack on you, right? So it was the wind here that I actually felt most unsteady with. And I can't imagine if it was windy and raining. Quite dangerous if that were going to be the case.
So once you get past Crawler's Ledge, then you start to get a lot better views of the Na Pali Coast itself, and it becomes beautiful in its own sort of way. And you're still, as you can see, you're still kind of hugging the cliff edge there, the trail on the left-hand side, and it's still rocky and loose, but it's not nearly so narrow as it is at Crawler's Ledge. So as you move closer to Kalalau Valley, you kind of get into some more beautiful, lush vegetation. And, it's just something wonderful around every turn, until finally you get to the edge of the valley and you're greeted by this sign, which I think Kristin has a thing or two to say about.
Yeah. So I'm thinking this sign means, oh, we're getting close, right, to the beach. And, we're doing good, whatever, and you're not. So I think in my head, I was thinking we were much closer than we were. So hence I started to get a little crabby for a few reasons, as you'll see coming up.
So there's about 3 miles left at this point.
Yeah.
So once you get past here, you come into an area that a lot of people call the red sand area. For obvious reasons, it's just this beautiful, rich red sand.
It's gorgeous. But again, you can't really tell here by the pictures, but it is so loose. And so you're tired. I'm thinking we're closer than we are. And I'm still sliding around like crazy, trying to get some grip, trying to go down this thing. And so last like 2 or 3 miles, I kind of had enough.
Yep. So once you get past this, there's one more river crossing in the Kalalau Valley. And then at long last, you arrive at the beach. And once you get to the beach, it pretty quickly becomes obvious where the camping areas are. And there's a lot of variety in camp areas. So you really kind of want to walk the length of it and figure out what's available and kind of scope out where you want to pitch your tent.
Just as a reminder here, no boats are able to dock on this beach ever. During the day, there are lots of tour boats that come along the Na Pali Coast all day long. They are not allowed to dock at all. The only ones that are allowed to dock are kayaks. And even then, I believe you have to have a permit,
yes,
to even step foot on that land. So it's pretty pristine.
And kayaks are on the same permit. So you get a permit and you can backpack or you can paddle. So
we made a beeline for the local watering hole, quite literally the local watering hole. This is a beautiful waterfall where everyone washes up and gathers water from. I thought it was hilarious that someone had left a little bar of soap on a little rock ledge nearby. And there's a big PVC pipe so you can pour water over your head, which I wasn't gutsy enough to do. But so that was a welcome wash up after all that.
So we've got a video here that Kristin took, and I'm not sure if you'll actually be able to hear the audio, but kind of gives you an idea of what it's like to stand on the beach and actually look around. So it was, like we said, we spent two nights on the beach, and we weren't sure that we were going to spend 2 nights initially, but we're really glad that we did. It gave us some time to recuperate and recover and explore a little bit, and realize that really we should have stayed a couple extra nights beyond that. Once you get there, there's our tents set up in the trees just on the edge of the beach, which was absolutely wonderful. But once you get camp set up, you can explore the Kalalau Valley, and there's tons of trails and little pools that collect in the river that you can sit around in all day. So there's just lots of things to do and explore and see.
The one thing though about this particular beach is the water here is notoriously dangerous. It's quite calm on this particular video, but that's another place where people are killed. Actually, is on this particular set of this particular beach. Probably more in the winter months, but it's pretty dangerous. So Tom and I had no interest in that. We're not huge swimmers anyway. So and it was hot, so we actually stuck in the trees. Hotter for normal than normal for Hawaii.
So and this is just one of the little pools that I found while I was exploring up the valley. Kristin spent more time in the hammocks nursing 2 feet full of blisters, so she didn't join me up here.
We'll talk about that later.
So at this point, we've got the packing interlude, and we just wanted to talk about a couple of things that we thought were really useful or not useful to have on the trail. So, I mean, the number one thing to keep in mind is to pack light, which isn't typically or traditionally my MO when I go backpacking, but having never backpacked in the tropics, I took it as a good opportunity to upgrade some of my equipment to lighter versions. And I think my eventual pack weight was 31 pounds with water and everything, and I think Kristin was a little bit lighter.
Mm-hmm.
Trekking poles are pretty essential, especially in the loose sections of the trail.
Yep. I never hike with hiking poles, and this is the one place where I honestly don't know if I would have made it without it. And we had read that ahead of time. So I'm really glad they do get kind of annoying because there's quite a bit of trail that you're right up against you and the brush is low. So that's annoying, but the times you need it, you need it.
So footwear, I wore Chacos almost the entire time.
Which is what I wish I would have done. I had my trusty broken in shoes. I didn't buy new shoes like you're not supposed to do. They were trusted. They've never given me blisters, and I wore my Smartwool socks. And the issue, I think the issue that I ran into is, number one, I don't usually hike for 9 hours. And I think that was a biggie. Number two, at a time. Number two is that much heat. I mean, even when I have been hiking before, even in the summer, it's usually quite a bit cooler. You know, you're usually up in the mountains or something, and I don't know. So I think it was that combination. So I had blisters and I somehow made it out alive. So
I was impressed and grateful.
I think my brain kicked in, and because it had to survive, to be honest, on the way out. So
yeah, I did bring a pair of trail runners along with too. I wore them a little bit, but most of the time I just wore my Chacos. So yeah, definitely leave your hiking boots at home.
Mm-hmm.
Bug spray. People talk on the Facebook group about how terrible the mosquitoes are out there. And we asked the question, well, we're from Minnesota. How bad are the mosquitoes? And someone responded, well, I'm from Iowa and you don't have anything to worry about.
Right.
So we didn't really have any problems with mosquitoes. We brought bug spray. The one place I noticed them is going up the valley, especially when you'd stop and rest somewhere, sit somewhere for a few minutes, they'd find you and they'd start swarming. So it is a good thing to have.
To be fair, I think the wind was a fair amount the few days we were there. I think so that might have helped too.
Other things, we were introduced to a rat sack, which we'd never used before, for food storage, which is basically just it's a steel mesh bag that seals shut with Velcro, and you can hang it from a tree rather than a bear bag or a bear can. And it's lighter than a bear can, and
you can roll it up.
Right.
It's pretty slick.
Right. It's good for keeping the mice and the rats and all the little critters out of your stuff, because there really isn't anything big like a bear that you need to worry about getting into your food.
Bugs, that sort of thing, you want to keep it out of. So yeah. We were glad we had that.
Yeah. We were happy that we had a Garmin with us, the satellite beacon, just no cell phone reception. And after watching a few videos on YouTube of the horror stories of the trail, we were glad to have it just in case we did need it.
And especially because like rescue would be pretty inaccessible. I mean, it's not like there's a lot of trails leading to this point. I mean, you're pretty isolated here. So I was really glad we had that.
Right. Hammocks, bring one hammock per person. Because they are wonderful.
And a must, because it's hard to, there's not really like nice grassy areas to lay down or kind of, it's like dead leaves and there's bugs or, gross stuff. And so, but there's plenty of places to hang hammocks. And you could probably sleep in them. We brought a tent just in case, but we only brought one hammock, and we absolutely would have dealt with the extra weight to bring two.
Sharing a hammock is hard.
Yep.
Sleeping bags, we decided to leave the sleeping bags. The weather forecast looked good, so we just brought our sleeping bag liners, and we brought a little lightweight down throw blanket from Costco. You can get them for like $10.
Yeah, just a lightweight throw. You can packable.
So that worked out just fine for us, and just skip the extra weight. And then I've got fuel with a question mark here. You can't fly with fuel. So a lot of people have the question once they get on the island of where to buy fuel canisters. And there are a number of places on the island that do sell them. And the Facebook group is a good source of information on that. The other thing that we heard a lot of rumors about on the Facebook group before we left is that there's a big stash of fuel canisters at the campground from people who bring them and don't want to pack them out, so they just leave them. And technically it's littering, and sometimes the state park comes in and cleans them out. So based on that, we didn't want to take our chances. So we picked up a fuel canister. But once we got there, as promised, there was a huge cache of fuel canisters. So if you feel like rolling the dice, don't bother bringing fuel. So after we had our 2 nights there, we decided to hit the road. I think I didn't skip a slide. And we did a pre-dawn start. So I think we started with headlamps. I think we left our camp at 5:30 in the morning. And we weren't sure if the forecast was going to hold. It was looking a little bit iffy, and we wanted to make sure that we were past the really exposed sections before the day heated up and the winds picked up. So that was really helpful, also to get a head start, because we figured it'd be slow going with Kristin's feet.
As it turns out, we made it 15 minutes quicker on the way out. I don't know how that happened. No idea.
So the big question, I think, is it really that dangerous as people make it out to be? And my initial thought is, no, it's not. But we also had about the most perfect weather imaginable, and that probably played a big factor in that.
I did say almost the whole time, I'm like, this trail's a gene cleanser, though. I mean, if you're stupid on this trail, you could get yourself in trouble real fast.
So and like we mentioned, the river crossings are nothing to take lightly. When we did it, the water was relatively low, so it was kind of a boulder hop and water above your knees. But if you go on YouTube and look at some videos of it, you'll see plenty of videos of people trying to ford raging rivers.
Yeah.
And you can easily see where things can get dangerous in a hurry.
And Tom is tall and leggy, by the way. So keep that in mind.
So with that brings us to the end of what we've got. So we're happy to answer any questions that you've got.
Hopefully that was enjoyable on this cold winter day here. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Well, you were mentioning a little bit about the danger of I was wondering what those like that one cliff there where you hiked around it. What do they call it? I forget.
Crawler's Ledge.
Yeah, Crawler's Ledge. What if that was wet? If the rocks were wet, would that be? What do you think?
It'd be slippery. I think the bigger concern, I think, would be more the loose sandy soil in wet weather, because it looks like it gets saturated really easily and starts to slide.
So as this trip got a little closer, we were kind of looking into this, and there are some horror videos on YouTube about people doing this in the weather, and it looks downright dangerous. On the other hand, you at least have something to hold on to there, like solid rock that's not going anywhere, and you can really lean into the wall. But I remember watching the videos, and Tom is like, I have no idea why they don't have clip-ins for like climbing here. It feels like that would be just a no-brainer, but why they don't, I don't know. Maybe because it's sacred land. I don't know, but they should probably, I don't know, have clip-ins there. So if it were wet, you're absolutely right. That would scare the heck out of me, which is why we left so early, because the weather was even just a slight chance of a storm. And we were like, we got to get past that section before it rains.
Any other questions? I think we put everyone to sleep.
Would you do it again?
That thorough?
Would you do it again, I guess?
I would, absolutely.
I think I would. But I would, if I was going to go through that much work, though, I would definitely stay longer. By the way, if you had more days too, it would give you more flexibility to come and go depending on the weather. And in this case, it's not just being miserable with weather, but it's actually kind of either dangerous or not. So that would give you more flexibility with weather.
Yeah, I was just gonna suggest that the extra days are good. If you get bad weather, then you can have a down day to wait for the
right.
weather to clear, right?
Yep.
Right, just sit and
Yeah.
wait it out wherever you happen to be.
Yep.
Mhm.
Well, there are a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know whether you can see the chat.
Oh, we can.
I can-
I can in a moment here. Okay, did we run into anybody on the hike? Yes. We didn't run it, it wasn't really busy on the trail, but we definitely passed a number of parties going both directions. And once you get to the campground, there's a fair number of people, just kind of milling about and relaxing and laying in hammocks all day. So there's definitely some people around.
It's very comfortable though. It wasn't I didn't feel super isolated, but it certainly didn't feel too busy to me either. It was a nice amount. We met some people on the trail that we wondered if they would be part of the gene cleansing though. Which we kind of wondered if they made it or not. So
yeah, we passed one couple I remember in particular, a couple of men who were wearing tennis shoes and cut off jeans, and they had backpacks with snorkeling gear in them, and that was all. And they were planning on hiking in and out in one day.
And no shirt on. It was like they had no idea what they were getting into.
So okay.
What was your,
Go ahead.
what did you rely on? What did you most heavily rely on regarding planning? Was it the Facebook website, or was it the park itself, or?
The Facebook web group is really useful, especially if you have questions. There's actually a lot of good resources on the internet. You don't have to do too much Googling to find them. There's probably 3 main websites that I can think of that got most of our information from. There's one, I think it might actually be KalauTrail.com.
Mm-hmm.
And they have links on transportation and the trail and things to pack. And so there's a lot of information out there.
Yeah, it's a very popular trail. Anybody on the Hawaiian Islands kind of knows this trail.
Go ahead.
So regarding the limitations for the 60 people a day that they're proving to walk through there, is that what it typically is, or was that just kind of COVID times kind of a thing?
Well, I think I know the answer to that question. I'm pretty sure it was COVID times. However, I seem to remember reading something that it was reduced before then, and they were really thinking about reducing it because of just kind of overuse and damage to the trail even before. And I feel like that's kind of a trend with all the national parks lately, is they're just becoming too popular. And so I seem to remember reading something about how they were kind of thinking about that anyway. And then there was a huge landslide in like 2000, like I want to say like 16, that was really close to here. And so that already reduced access. And so it was kind of a convenient excuse to kind of reduce it to 60 again. So I think all of those things were kind of happening at the same time.
Yeah. As to the question about light hiking boots, I think I don't really have too much I don't usually need too much ankle support, so I was just fine with Chacos. I think I would definitely hesitate about bringing, anything too far above the ankle just because of the weight and the heat, unless you can find something that's just super breathable.
Yeah, and I had hiking shoes that were quite lightweight.
Were there
And
any
of course, how that turned out?
Were there any concerns about animals or snakes or any of that kind of thing?
No. One of the really cool things about the Hawaiian Islands is there aren't really any dangerous animals, dangerous predators. There are wild boar or I should say invasive wild boar on the island. That actually the area along the trail is open to bow hunting for wild boar. So you see signs about that. but we never ran into them. You run into goats, you run into lots of chickens everywhere on the island. And there's a whole story about that, about Hurricane Iniki, and that's an entire other story. But there's chickens everywhere, even on Kalalau Beach, miles from any real civilization. There's chickens.
No, there's really nothing to worry about.
That's good. Yeah.
Question about the temps on the trail. I think we had very mild temps. I think it got up into the mid 80s during the day. So like the midday heat was, you'd sit in the shade and relax. And it got down to, I don't know, upper 60s at night.
Yeah, I was plenty warm in like a down little thin blanket and a sleeping bag liner. I mean, I don't think it probably got below.
I don't think it got much below 70.
Yeah, maybe 65 at the lowest.
Yeah, and I think June and July, I think really kind of is the high season there, because it's dry, the weather's the most mild. So that's really seems to be the best time to go.
By the way, that might have made getting permits extra difficult, because this is the dry season and probably a little safer. And so everybody's trying to go in June, July, August, in those dry months. So that also probably contributed to how hard it was to get permits.
Yeah. As far as running across people on Crawler's Ledge, I think, did we? I forget if
we did
or
a
not.
little bit before and a little after, but it's a really good question. It's really funny that you bring that up, because now that I've done it, I'm like, maybe I should have like yelled around the ledge there to make sure no one was around. I guess you just have to backtrack.
Yeah. We didn't talk to any of the kayakers, really, but I thought about it. I mean, they came loaded in with coolers, and they were cooking some amazing smelling cheeseburgers. So I thought about going and making friends as we were sitting boiling some water for our backpacker pantry.
Right.
Tourists in the water. Kristin mentioned that during the day you've got boat tours coming by, boat tours and helicopter tours coming by kind of all day long, but none of them are coming ashore because it's illegal for motorized craft to land on the beach. So they come and they kind of go by, and everyone looks at you as you're sitting on the beach, but it's not swamped with tourists at all.
Can you show the beginning picture of the Na Pali Coast? I got to show you something that this is where people try to swim, and this is where people die and do stupid things. So that long beach to the left is the one that we stayed at, right? Okay, so then there's that cliff, and then you see that tiny little beach next door that's kind of really nestled in there. When the tide is low enough, apparently the sand goes up around where people will almost be able to walk over to that tiny beach. However, that distance is, I've read a lot of things, it's longer than you think, and that water is more dangerous than you think. So people will have gotten in trouble going from that long beach that we stayed at to that other one. So that's another thing that people will try to do, apparently.
So I'm looking for any other questions here. I think I missed a couple, but so speak up if you have any more. There's a comment about, go ahead.
So you had suggested, getting the permit first and then arranging the rest of the trip. I was just wondering if you have some thoughts on, how expensive the airfare might be within 30 days of traveling, and the availability of hotels before and after your hike.
That was a concern that we heard a lot of people voicing on the Facebook group after they got their permits, and we're trying to figure out, okay, where are we going to stay? How are we going to get from the airport? Oh, and this is June of last year when everyone couldn't find a rental car anywhere, and people were renting U-Hauls to drive around in. So we were really happy that we reserved a rental car 6 months in advance, and everything was
Yeah,
waiting for us.
the thing you got to know about Hawaii is renting cars. You got to be a little more careful with, because they only have so much to deal with, and that's even throughout the whole year, even pre-COVID, even on trips I've taken before to Hawaii. I mean, I'm a Uber planner, so I always reserve my car right away, and we did that per usual, and we were so thankful that we did, because people were in big trouble not getting cars. So that would be the one hang up of getting the permits first, unless you're doing it just months and months and months. No,
Right.
You can't, because you can only get 30 days in advance.
30 days in
So
advance.
if I were you, I would actually rent a car. You can always cancel it. You're not putting any money down. Rent a car for the time period that you're thinking of, roughly, and you can always change that and then see if you get permits. But the car issue is a real thing in Hawaii.
Right. We were on the island. We ended up being on the island for 2 weeks. So that kind of gave us a pretty big window of dates that we could try and get trail permits for. And yeah, we reserved as much as we could way back in January, especially things where we knew we could cancel them up until this date. And so we had cancellation dates on the calendar and stuff.
So what we ended up doing for lodging, by the way, is we reserved X amount of days. During that time, we were on trail for 2 nights. We ended up eating the cost of those 2 nights to reserve our spot at our Airbnb when we got back, because the last thing we wanted to do is get back out of this trail. And then, I don't know, we didn't know where to put our stuff because we weren't going to be parking there. So we actually ended up eating the cost of those 2 nights so that we could go right back to our Airbnb, clean up, wash up, have all our stuff there and safe. And then in case there was weather issues, we could have gone to the beach, slept overnight, and went back the next day. So it gave us flexibility by having a place to stay by eating that cost, which is kind of a pain, but it did give us some security.
Yeah. There was one comment on wearing life vests in case you fell off the cliff, and the cliff was high enough. I don't think that a life vest would have done you too much good.
Right.
Had you fallen.
You're a goner.
So better just to have sure footing and good hiking poles.
So one of the reasons I went so excessively slow is because I'm going along the first 3 miles, and I legitimately like my foot would slide under me, and I tripped 3 times in I don't know, maybe a mile and a half. And I'm like, that is just not like me. And then I figured out, oh, this ground is not what I think it is. And so I was almost excessively cautious, because there were some times that were on the edge, and I'm like, geez, I was all confident, and I learned I couldn't trust the ground. Maybe it was my shoes. Tom did better in his chacos. They're a little stickier.
Looks like you could almost use a parachute with.
I wouldn't have wanted to carry a parachute for those 11 miles. Would have been the catch there.
By the way, this picture Tom took from a helicopter that we also took on the island. We kind of went all out, and helicopter flights, of course, are insanely expensive. But I've been told, and I 100% agree with this, that if you're ever going to do a helicopter ride in Hawaii, Kauai is one to do. And I've taken helicopter rides several other places, and Kauai was by far the best place to take it. And we're really glad we did that.
Yeah. Other things that we did on the island, since someone asked, we did the helicopter ride. We ended up doing a boat tour along the Na Pali Coast. So we really kind of saw it from every angle. There's also a state park up above the valley that you can go to, and you can actually walk along the upper rim of the valley, and there's all sorts of hiking up there. We did a lot of day hiking.
We were all over the island. The other side, on the other side of the island is Waimea Canyon, which is basically it's called the Grand Canyon of the Pacific. So that gives you an idea of what that's all about.
And it's really interesting because the island is in a rain shadow. So half of the island is lush and green and beautiful. And so the center of the island, there's a mountain that's consistently holds the record for the most rainfall in the world. And 8 miles away in Waimea Canyon, they get less than 8 inches of rain a year on average.
It's absolutely crazy.
So that's super interesting. Lots of hiking. You can actually hike through the Alakai Swamp, which we did, which is an interesting story. It's the highest elevation swamp in the world, and they've got a boardwalk built across it. So you can hike, and I think it's about a 3.5 mile out and back hike to this overlook where you can look north up the valley, and you can see the coastal town up there that the name escapes me at the moment. But we did this hike, and it's wet and it's miserable because you're hiking through a swamp and it's foggy, and we get to the end of the trail, and the beautiful view was obscured by clouds so thick you could barely see 5 feet in front of you. So it was a little bit of a wash, but
that was unlike any other hike I've ever taken in my life, and unlike any hike I will ever take in my life, ever. Like that trail was very unique. So in other words, there's plenty to do in Kauai and very different landscapes, which I didn't expect to have them so severely different, but a lot of uniqueness on Kauai.
Yep, there's a number of botanical gardens on the island too that are absolutely amazing, and they do tours of those. So those are definitely worth checking out. Any other questions?
Any other last questions?
Yeah, just one more. You said the waters were kind of dangerous, but people are going in there and snorkeling, or is it? Are there certain parts of the beaches that are safe? And
there are certain parts along the coastline that are safe, but they do warn you about rip currents along Kalalau Beach.
Well,
so we did see people with snorkeling gear that were snorkels and fins that were going to swim over to that other beach and try and swim back. So there are people that do swim there. We just chose not to.
A little closer to the beginning of the trail, I think the waters aren't quite as bad, because there's a big beach there. I can't remember the name of it, but we never got there, but it was recommended to us. And that one is a really great snorkeling beach. But the section of trail that we hiked, I think that water can be notoriously pretty rough. Tom is pulling up some more pictures for those that are interested.
Yeah. So if you're curious about the Alakai Swamp. No,
that's not the bad one. That's the bad one. Yeah. I was miserable. It was wet and rainy, but it was so cool. Like nothing I've ever done.
Yep. This is the view of the valley once you get to the end of the trail.
So
yeah, it was a very cool trip.
I like that one.
Yeah, the boardwalk isn't in the best shape.
It wasn't in the best shape. That 3 miles felt a lot longer. It was a bit rough.
So,
and Tom's tall, so anyway, we could talk a lot about our trip, but.
Which trail was the boardwalk on? I think it's actually called the Alakai Swamp Trail.
Alakai Swamp. It's if you look that up, it's supposedly one of the highest swamps in the world.
Right.
It's a very unique hike, I have to say.
Yeah, this one is interesting. The telephone pole you see here hiding in the swamp is during World War II, the Army built a telephone line from Lahui, which is the
airport. That's where the airport
where the airport is, to the northern coast town, because they were concerned that the Japanese would capture that town and cut off communications. So there's still remnants of that old telephone line running through the swamp.
Okay, thanks, Tom and Kristin. That's a really interesting presentation. What a heck of a hike.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.